Hello music lovers, welcome to episode 70 of What Makes This Song Special. Sincere apologies for leaving you hanging for a couple of weeks. I know I usually try to make an episode every week, but last week I had a bit of a sniffly cold. I had loads of stuff to try and do and organise for the start of the new year, and it just didn't come together for me. So hopefully edit this one today, get it out tonight, and you can all enjoy a wee story, as always, about a song, why a song is special to me, a wee story about my life. Whether that's interesting to you or not, it's something that's personal to me that lets you know why a song is special to an individual person. Everybody's got their own, I suppose, experiences with songs and why different songs become the soundtracks to each of our individual experience here on planet Earth. So this one for me, it's got a wee special story. I'll always follow up with a wee bit of information about the song as well, a little bit of a chat about the singer towards the end, and then part 2 that you can click somewhere at the end, which will give you my cover version of today's song, which is Another Day in Paradise by the great Phil Collins. I know I'm wearing a Queen t-shirt. I was aware of that just about 10 minutes ago, and I was like, I'm not going to change the Queen t-shirt. I don't have a Phil Collins t-shirt to wear. So on a side note, I did go and see the Queen live at the IMAX experience. I don't know what countries that's available in. I don't know where else that's happening in the world, but it was amazing. Such a great experience. Just incredible. My wife got me tickets for my Christmas, and I was not really knowing what to expect. I'm just going to see a recording of a 40-year-old concert of Queen's from 1981, more than 40 years, live in Canada, and it was just amazing. It was such a cool experience. The cinematography, the audio, everything about it was just really impressive. All the zoom-ins to see all the individual, members playing their instruments, and just amazing, really cool. My favourite band of all time, so obviously going to appeal to me, but I would say if you like Queen, try and check it out, give it a wee Google, and see if you can see it at a local cinema or whatever. It was really cool experience. Anyway, away from Queen and on to Phil Collins. This week's story goes back to the last few days of 1999. So the end of a millennium, the end of a century. I just turned 18. I'd just left school maybe a few months before this, and I decided that I wanted to go away for a few days. I wanted to go to Italy for a few days. It would be the first time that I'd go away without my parents. It seems like a strange time to have decided to go away to the middle of nowhere, to a wee village in the mountains, when it was going to be the millennium, the party of the century, and I'm going away to the middle of nowhere. I only really thought about that now and thought about how maybe that is quite a strange decision. But anyway, it would be the first time that I'd go away without my parents. My grandparents had left the house in Italy to the family, and it was lying empty, and it was the house that had been our holiday home almost every summer of my childhood. It was also at many points in my youth that I've mentioned before, the house that we lived in when things weren't going so great in Glasgow when we moved over there. And it seemed silly not to just jump over and use the house now that I was a grown-up. I suppose I didn't really feel like a grown-up, I still felt like a big kid. But I wanted to go away, without the parents and see what it was like to be a wee bit independent. So just turned 18, excited about going, a wee bit nervous. Nobody in the village spoke a word of English, and my Italian at that point wasn't amazing, even though, as I said, I'd lived there for large parts of my childhood. No excuse really not to have had better Italian at that point. It has got better over the years, thankfully, but there was sort of no comfort blanket if anything happened, if I wasn't well, or that type of thing. When you're a kid, you always I say kid, 18, but you know what I mean, you are still a kid at 18. I had lots of friends and family over there, and I knew I had to sort of grow up and stop worrying so much. So off I was going. The night before the flight, I went to Braehead, a Braehead shopping centre just outside Glasgow, and it was this place that I just hadn't long opened, and people had been talking about how great this new sort of American style shopping mall was that we didn't have a lot of in Glasgow at the time. And I went round a few shops and bought some clothes for going away, and I went to the bank machine to take money out, for going away, and the ATM swallowed my bank card. I don't know why, I don't know what happened, but it just didn't come back out, and the money didn't come out. And I was like, I was young, I didn't have credit cards or numerous bank accounts. I had one account, one card, and now no card. And I was just about to go on holiday the next day. So total disaster. Not a good way to start the holiday. But anyway, following afternoon, I'm on a plane with an envelope full of lira on me, because I knew I wouldn't be able to withdraw any funds when I was over there. And I was like, it was in my backpack, and I was thinking, God, if I lose that money, I'm in serious trouble, So the plane touched down in Fiumicino Airport early evening, and I went to collect my suitcase. And I recognised the suitcase on the carousel, grabbed it, went to find out how to get a train to Termini Station, which is the main train station in Rome. And then I was going to catch another train to Monte Cassino, which is near where my dad's from, where the village is that we were going to. So it turned out the train was going to be about an hour. So I sat and I waited, and at one point, I don't know why, but I opened the suitcase to get something out, and to my absolute horror, realised that it wasn't my suitcase. It was, an identical suitcase, but it wasn't my suitcase, which is strange, because it wasn't just like like most people have just got like black luggage or whatever, it was like a kind of old sort of Italian olive green suitcase with I think it had like brown leather handles. It was like one of my mum and dad's old suitcases that I'd borrowed. It wasn't the type of suitcase that you think somebody else would have the same one, but somebody else obviously did have the same one, and I'd taken that one. My stomach turned, I felt sick, I ran to the information point and tried to explain that somebody had taken my suitcase and I'd ended up with theirs. Complete disaster. They told me not to leave the airport until they located my suitcase. So hours passed, I'm stuck in the airport, I've missed the trains, and in the end the airport closed, and I had to sleep all night in the airport on a sort of metal chair, really uncomfortable, holding on to my rucksack that had my envelope full of lira in it for dear life, with a few other essentials. It's just the longest night ever in an airport, and I always remember at one point in a sort of sleepy haze that I was convinced I saw my mum and dad and they'd come to help me save the day, only to realise, of course, that it wasn't them. The reality of that would have been completely ridiculous. But yeah, just desperate for somebody to come and go, right, this is all going to be okay, we'll fix this. But, I was on my own. And so the person dealing with the case, no pun intended, the suitcase, was hopeless. So at one point in the early hours of the morning, I walked to a different part of the airport and asked to go to lost property. And there, after hours of waiting, was my suitcase. It had been in the airport the entire time, so I was absolutely raging that nobody had even thought to do that for me when I'd reported it. So anyway, airport, disaster, got my suitcase, and I got to Termini Station in Rome with my rucksack and my suitcase, and I boarded the train to Cassino, knowing that my cousin Mena, who had phoned, would be there to pick me up at the other end. So I was finally starting to feel a bit more relaxed. I was getting somewhere. Shattered, dirty, feeling horrible, and I sunk down into the seat of the train, and I looked out the windows as it headed out of Rome and travelled south through Lazio, through the landscape. The sky was deep blue, the sun was shining, and there was snow in the mountains. And the last time I'd been in Italy before that, when it was winter time, I'd been in primary school. I was actually living there, and I hadn't been back in a winter since that moment a few years before, and it was sort of reminding me of the times there as a kid, the smell of the wood fires and collecting wood for the fire, eating panettone and torrone and all the amazing traditions that come with Christmas and New Year in Italy. And I was like, wow, I'm home. This is amazing. It's all going to be okay. So, as always, when I go on holiday, anytime I go on a holiday, I always buy or nowadays download an album that I've not heard before, so that I'll have something to remind me of the trip. I suppose it's quite apt that this is what I do now. Every week I talk about things that remind me of or songs that remind me of stories and vice versa. I suppose some of that is because I used to always buy albums before, major life events and things like that. So going on holidays and things like that, I'd always buy like a new album. So aside from just hearing a song on the radio that reminds you of a big event, also there are probably an album that reminds me of every holiday. And the albums I'd bought in the Braehead shopping mall the day before, just before my card was swallowed, were Phil Collins' Hits album and George Michael's Songs of the Last Century. And I listened to both albums back to back until I met my cousin Mena at the station, got a lift to my favourite place in the world, and all was good. So the next few days were amazing. There's a real buzz about the fact that it was about to be the new year. Not just a new year and not just a new century, a new millennium. There was a real feeling of privilege. It's rare for most people, I suppose, even to experience a century change in a lifetime. If you're lucky enough to be born near the end of a century, you might get to, see the century turn over. But a lot of people don't get to see that. And also, not many people get to see a millennium. So it was a pretty big thing, and people were planning the party to end all parties, even though, as I said, it was kind of middle of nowhere in the mountains. And in true fashion of the village and the surrounding area where we're from in Italy, the ridiculous things that the community funds end up being spent on are always quite laughable. I mean, I don't think they'd be laughable if I was living there and it was me paying into that system, because some of the things that are built or funded are just, another episode, another chat about that at some point. I don't want to get into politics, but outrageous. And of course, this was the kind of ridiculous spend to end ridiculous spends. They'd built this huge nightclub called Millennia, and it had been built in the village next to us, just up in the hills, near a town called Atina. Atina's a tiny town as well. And it was at that moment in time, when they built it, I think the second biggest nightclub in the whole of Europe. And they'd built it in the mountains, in the middle of a tiny, valley of villages that had populations of a couple of thousand people here and there. I mean, just ridiculous. To this day, I don't know how that happened, how it was allowed to happen. Obviously, probably some money laundering and, favours being done and all that kind of nonsense. So bizarre. But anyway, there's this huge buzz about this nightclub. Everybody is like, oh, there's this nightclub that's just about to be opened, and it's the opening night's going to be the Millennium. It's going to be New Year's Eve party. It's the second biggest club in the world. There were all these rumours going around. My mates were all full of the buzz about this. They were telling us these epic stories about, this, it's, they were saying things like, there are DJs being flown over from Ibiza, and there was even talk that Ricky Martin was going to be there to sing for the opening. I mean, again, I don't think there was any truth in any of it, and I was too young to question the absurd, idea of it, but I was just excited to be there. Now, I can't actually remember what happened exactly on New Year's Eve. It's a bit of a blur. I had a ticket to go to the club, and there was quite a few pals going that I'd grown up with, and when I was over there when I was a kid, and the guy that was supposed to be giving me a lift, I couldn't find him at the bar beforehand, and then it was before, I think I just got my first mobile phone, maybe not that long ago. I mean, we're talking the year 2000, so mobile phones were really just becoming something that people had, but I didn't have like phone numbers for a lot of my mates in Italy and stuff at the time either, so I don't even know if I had my mobile phone with me, I can't remember, but I couldn't get hold of anybody, and there were like cars of people going, and it just became kind of impossible from what I can remember. And the ticket that I had ended up, just sitting in my pocket. I don't know. As I said, it's a bit of a blur. But must have been about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, I was thinking that I was going to spend the Millennium without any party to go to. And then my cousin Mena turned up and she said there was a big feast happening in the next village, which I was surprised at, because the next village is called Valle Grande, and the village she was referring to is it's like a ghost town. And if you go there during the day, you literally think there's one shop, and there's nothing else. A shop and a bar. Even less people living there than our village, But I jumped in her car, and as we approached, I could see people and fireworks and stuff happening, and it was great. And we ended up at this little square, sat round this huge fire. There were lots of old ladies handing out bowls of pasta that they'd made for everybody for the occasion. So homemade pasta from the ladies of the village. And if anybody's ever been to Italy and tried homemade pasta from the ladies of a village, you'll know it's better than any restaurant you'll ever go to. So there's numerous different types of pasta being passed around, and it was in sort of infinite production line. You could have as much as you wanted. There was homemade wine being passed around by the old men who'd all made their own wine. It was being handed around in jam jars and empty Nutella glasses and plastic cups when they ran out of them. And we ended up singing songs, eating pasta, drinking wine with a bunch of folk that I'd never met before. Real people from a wee village in the middle of nowhere. Folk who didn't have money, but had a different type of wealth than anything that could ever really be properly quantified. You know, just had a contentment that most of us can, including me, can only really dream of. That kind of real fulfillment of life and happiness that you get just from spending time with family and, you know, living life and being out in nature and all those amazing things that become more and more important as you sort of study what is important in life, you know, without getting too philosophical. So yeah, that's what the song takes me back to. I could have picked any song from those two albums that I mentioned, but Another Day in Paradise just had the edge over the others. I think it's the first song on the Hits album, I think, that I had on Phil Collins' Hits. But I think lyrically it says a lot, and musically it just takes me back to that young boy that was kind of scared of everything, and I was having a bit of a disaster, and then I was just sitting on the train, making my way, you know, home, essentially, as I've always kind of seen it as home, and having these little life experiences that were like a bit different to all my mates and stuff like that. You know, just I don't think any of my mates have ever really kind of experienced some of those kind of weird things, and maybe some folk would find it a bit boring. And but yeah, it was really cool just being in the middle of nowhere in the mountains with a bunch of, you know, old folk who I'd never met before, eating homemade pasta and wine and celebrating the millennium. So pretty cool. The song, I always talk about the song Another Day in Paradise, written and recorded by Phil Collins. It was released in 1989. It was the first single from the album But Seriously, a brilliant album, really good. The song deals with the subject of homelessness and paradise, and, you know, and the very kind of opposing ends of a sort of ideological spectrum, I suppose. He sings the song from the persona of like an onlooker watching this man cross the road to ignore this homeless lady that's asking for help and begging for help. And it's a powerful lyric from start to finish. It deals with poverty, positions of privilege, morals. And the song, of course, was a huge number one hit. It enjoyed worldwide success, eventually becoming one of the most successful songs of his career, winning many awards, including a Grammy for Record of the Year, nominated for Song of the Year, Best Male Pop Vocal Performance, Best Music Video, and also Best British Single at the 1990 Brit Awards. And a wee cheeky fact, I always like to throw in a wee cheeky kind of would you believe fact each week about the songs. David Crosby, the famous singer-songwriter and part of the legendary Crosby, Stills and Nash, or even Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young at another point in their incarnation, he actually sings the backing vocals on Another Day in Paradise. He's a good friend of Phil Collins, and he's on the track as well, which is pretty cool. Wee bit of music trivia for you there. So some critics actually slated Phil Collins at the time and deemed him unqualified to sing about the poor, while others accused him of profiteering from homelessness. Collins responded, by saying that when he drives down the street, he saw the same things that everyone else sees, and it's a misconception to think that if you have a lot of money, you're somehow going to be completely out of touch with reality, which it seemed he took a lot of stick for the song at the time, and I think it's unfair. I think a songwriter, an artist, should be able to write about anything they want, provided they're not a complete hypocrite, and I don't think he was a hypocrite. The truth is, Phil actually collected money for many homeless charities from fans who attended his concerts, and then donated double the takings of what he collected out of his own money to those charities. So I think that actually kills the argument about him being a hypocrite or anything like that. Or, I just don't think that's really fair. Personally, that's my thoughts. I know other people will have different opinions on it, but I think it's a wonderful song, and I don't think he pokes any sort of fun, or I don't think it's too light-hearted in the way that he speaks about homelessness. It's quite a serious song, and it seems, heartfelt to me. So vocally, I think Phil Collins was a really underrated singer at his peak. A great range, great emotional connection to the lyrics. And he maybe suffered a little from having been the drummer in Genesis. I think at first people saw him as a drummer who was singing out of necessity because Peter Gabriel had left the band. But once he started releasing solo records, I think people started to really respect him more as an actual singer in his own right. He was probably a better drummer than a singer, but that speaks more about how incredible his skills were behind the drum kit than it does diminish how good he was behind the microphone. I think a really iconic singer, a really iconic and sort of recognisable voice, slightly thin and sort of nasal in tone, but not in a way that counts as a negative at all. I think it made his voice even more distinctive. And there's a power. I think there's a power in his voice that doesn't necessarily come from like volume and sort of theatrical warmth that you would maybe associate power with other voices, but it just cuts through the mix perfectly. Yeah, I loved his voice. Sad to see that he's had a lot of kind of health issues and things like that over the last few years. But when he has been able to get on stage, the voice, albeit not quite at its peak, has still got that beautiful tone and emotion and recognisable quality that we all kind of fell in love with as Phil Collins' voice. So I love his voice. I think he's an amazing artist. An artist that probably doesn't get spoken about enough anymore. His history from being in Genesis and writing a lot of the songs in Genesis and even singing a lot of the songs in Genesis, much as I'm saying that he was like the drummer in Genesis and then became the singer. He did also sing a lot of backing vocals and parts of the vocals as well in Genesis, even though Peter Gabriel was more kind of the main singer. But just, yeah, brilliant song, in my opinion. And that's why the song's special to me. It kind of reminds me of that trip, first trip as a kind of young adult searching for adventures in the world. And it'll always take me back to that time. Great time and a great song. So there you go. So why is the song special to you? Is the song special to you? If it is, tell me a wee story in the comments. Please hit the subscribe button. I was doing really well for subscriptions there over Christmas and New Year, and it's slowed down a wee bit again, probably because I've not posted as regularly, so it's partially my own fault. But please like it, subscribe. If you like the episodes and you like the stories or you like the songs, the cover, share it on WhatsApp or share it with somebody on Facebook or whatever. It would really help. Thank you so much. As always, part 2 will be popping up here somewhere in the next few seconds, where you can click and hear me do my own cover version of Another Day in Paradise. Until then, I will see you next week for another song and another story. Thank you.